You probably know someone like this. The person you call when the car makes a noise nobody can identify, when the pipe starts leaking at 11 p.m., when the IKEA instructions make zero sense and you've been staring at them for 40 minutes. They show up, look at the problem for about 10 seconds, and then just fix it. No YouTube tutorial, no panic, just quiet competence moving through space. And here's what nobody talks about. That person isn't just handy, they're wired differently. And the psychology behind why some people can fix almost anything, while others can't figure out which end of a screwdriver to hold, that goes somewhere most people never think to look. Let's start with where it actually comes from, because it's almost never natural talent. It's almost never something they were born with. The fixers of the world were almost always made, shaped by specific environments, specific childhoods, specific moments where there was nobody else to call. Research in developmental psychology consistently shows that problem-solving confidence, the actual belief that you can figure things out, gets built in early childhood through what's called mastery experiences, small wins, moments where a kid tried something, failed, tried again, and got it, not someone else getting it for them. That distinction matters enormously. Psychologist Albert Bandura called this self-efficacy, and the fixers? They didn't just learn to fix things, they built an identity around the act of figuring it out. By the time they're adults, that identity is so deeply encoded that walking past a broken thing without at least attempting it feels almost physically uncomfortable.
But here's what's fascinating. Most fixers don't describe what they do as intelligence. They describe it as patience. They'll tell you anyone could do this. You just have to not give up before you understand it. And that's actually a profoundly important distinction because what they're describing isn't a skill. It's a tolerance for confusion. The ability to sit inside a problem, not knowing the answer yet, without panicking. That's the actual engine. And most people abandon the problem right there, in that uncomfortable window, before understanding arrives. Fixers learned somehow to stay. Now, where does that come from? Because patience with confusion doesn't come from nowhere. A lot of fixers grew up in environments where resources were limited, where calling a repair person wasn't really an option, not a financial lecture, just a fact. When something broke in certain households, you fixed it or you went without. And that constraint, that absence of an easy exit, forced a kind of cognitive engagement that comfortable environments often don't produce. There's research on this. Studies on problem-solving behavior show that people who grow up with fewer readily available solutions develop stronger lateral thinking, the ability to approach a problem from multiple angles rather than waiting for the obvious path to appear. Constraint, it turns out, is one of the most powerful teachers there is. And here's where it gets interesting, because fixing things isn't just mechanical, it's deeply psychological. The person who can diagnose a strange engine noise or rewire a light switch or salvage a broken appliance is doing something cognitively that has very little to do with the object in front of them. They're pattern matching. Their brain has built up over years of hands-on experience, a vast internal library of how things work, not memorized from manuals, internalized through touch, trial, failure, and repetition. Cognitive scientists call this procedural knowledge, knowing through doing rather than knowing through reading. And it is encoded differently in the brain, deeper, more durable, harder to forget, which is why fixers often can't fully explain what they know. Ask them to walk you through exactly why they tightened that particular bolt first, and they'll pause, frown slightly, and say something like, "It just felt right. It did feel right." Their hands know things their language centers haven't caught up to yet. But let's talk about the paradox, because there's always one. People who fix everything are often deeply uncomfortable asking for help, not because they're arrogant, not because they think they're better than anyone, but because their entire psychological architecture was built around self-sufficiency. Needing help doesn't just feel inconvenient. At some level, it feels like a contradiction of self, like being bad at the one thing that defines them. Studies on self-reliant personality types consistently show elevated stress responses when placed in situations of forced dependence. The fixer who throws their back out and can't maintain the house isn't just physically limited, they're psychologically destabilized. Identity and competence got fused together somewhere along the way, and separating them is hard work. There's something else worth naming. Fixers tend to see the world differently at a perceptual level, literally. Where most people walk past a wobbly railing and register it as background noise, the fixer's brain flags it, files it, calculates how long before it becomes a real problem. They're not pessimists. They're running a continuous low-level maintenance scan of their environment. The world is always slightly broken, and they are always, somewhere in the back of their mind, taking notes. Psychologists describe this as heightened environmental attunement, a tendency to notice system states, things that are out of alignment, things approaching failure, things that could be better. It's the same perceptual style that makes great surgeons, great engineers, great mechanics. The ability to read a system's behavior before it tells you something's wrong. And perhaps most interestingly, this quality tends to extend beyond physical objects. The person who fixes everything around the house is often also the person who notices something's wrong with a friend before the friend does, who sees the team dynamic starting to crack before it becomes conflict, who senses the structural weakness in a plan everyone else is excited about. Because fixing isn't a hobby, it's a way of seeing, and once the brain learns to look for what's broken, it doesn't restrict that skill to pipes and engines. Now here's the quiet cost, because there is one. People who fix everything often become the person everyone calls, and they usually pick up because that's who they are. But over time, always being the solution quietly teaches everyone around them to be the problem. The fixer creates dependency without meaning to, becomes load-bearing in other people's lives, and because they're quietly competent about it, because they don't complain, nobody thinks to ask if they're okay. They're fine. They always fix it. They always figure it out, until the thing they can't fix is themselves. The truth about people who can fix everything is that their greatest strength and their deepest vulnerability are exactly the same thing. The refusal to leave a problem unsolved. Applied to a leaking pipe, it's invaluable. Applied to a relationship that's beyond repair, or a situation that requires letting go rather than fixing, it becomes a trap. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be accepted, and that lesson tends to arrive late for people who spent their whole life proving otherwise. They're not superhuman. They're just people who learned young that the world responds to patience and attention, that broken things usually have a logic to them if you're willing to look long enough. That confusion isn't a sign to stop. It's a sign you're getting close. And in a world that increasingly outsources every inconvenience, that calls a service for every small difficulty, that Googles before it touches, the person who actually reaches in and figures it out is getting rarer, and maybe a little more valuable than they've ever been given credit for.